I'm so glad to be joined today by Vanessa Otero. She's the founder and CEO of AdFontes Media. Vanessa, it's so great to be speaking with you.
Great to be here with you, Mosh.
So, you're the creator of the media bias chart, which we'll get into in a little bit. Media bias, of course, has been around since media has been around, but it feels like it's taken on more resonance in recent years as our politics have evolved, not in altogether good ways. You've done extensive work in this world. Has it always been this way? Why does it feel different today when it comes to bias than even it felt 20 years ago?
It hasn't always been this way. And the primary thing is that we now have tens of thousands of news and information sources. That was not always the case. If you go back to the 60s and 70s with three network broadcast channels plus a few major local papers and national papers, magazines, that was primarily where Americans got their news. And it really shifted quite a bit in the 80s and 90s with the advent of 24-hour cable news. For the first time, you started to see just expressly partisan TV news, which was sort of weird and jarring for folks that lived through that. But then in the 2000s, digital content, 2008 we got smartphones. The 2010s we got really good social media apps on those smartphones. So now you just have so many people who are publishers of information. And generally, more information is a good thing, but we're going through this learning curve of how to sort through more information than we've ever had available to us at any time.
Yeah, I feel like, as somebody who kind of lived it, who worked in cable news, has worked in digital news, has worked in network news, that, some level of this is good, right? There's accountability and transparency in calling out bias. At the same time, it's created this kind of hyper partisanship and explain the business model and how it sort of made things worse when it comes to bias. It's something I noticed in my time in cable news, which is they notice that there's an audience if you serve people a specific type of content all the time.
Definitely. And when there used to be a business incentive where you had to appeal to most people. If it was a cable news network and everybody's watching it, then you were business wise incentivized to cast a broad net and not alienate parts of that audience. Well, when now it's fragmented and you have so many competing news sources, you have to stand out. You have to gain an audience. And one of the cheapest, quickest, easiest ways to get an audience is to make the audience angry and feed them things that are very bias confirming. So that incentive for, especially for small fry, publishers, which most folks creating websites or blogs or podcasts or YouTube channels, that's easy to gravitate to. It's easy to get a significant angry chunk of the audience and enough to monetize your operation of one person or five people running a website. It's harder, as you know, to create content that's broadly appealing, accurate, well researched, minimally biased, and very interesting to an
Mm.
audience.
Yeah, outrage sells, and unfortunately, the social media algorithms have only made that worse, right?
Yes, definitely.
That ultimately, if you're looking to make a buck, people are going to click on videos that don't necessarily correspond to things that are the most popular out there or the most common, but the most extreme. The loudest voices tend to rule. So you created this bias chart 7 years ago, but talk to me about your story, how you got into this sort of media analysis game. Where did that come from? Where did your interest in this come from? And why, 2016 is an interesting year given the politics of that year.
Definitely.
Um, how the chart came about.
Thanks for that question. I love getting that question because I think people can relate to, what I was thinking and feeling in 2016. It was Hillary versus Trump, and the social media platform of the day that was really driving a lot of news engagement was Facebook. It's
Those were
not,
the days. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's not so much anymore, right? They don't have a news feed to speak of. You can still get together in groups of folks who think like you, but uh,
Yeah, I still have to police my father's Facebook feed when I go home to visit the parents. We're like,
yeah.
how are you following this account, Dad?
Yeah, but it seemed like a lot of folks were fighting about politics on Facebook back then. And the specific way they would fight about it was just quite eye-opening. One, if you're left leaning, you're trying to convince somebody's right leaning, and then you use a left leaning article like HuffPost or Salon or something, and your right leaning friend, relative would just totally discount it because it's biased, it's left. And then they would in turn share some like right wing YouTube video or a Breitbart article, and the left wing person would be like, that's totally biased too. So not only were people not convincing each other, they were alienating each other because some of this content is pretty demeaning to the other side. It's very vilifying. People started.
Selective details.
Oh, for
Yeah.
sure, for sure. It's not outright. You can't necessarily classify all this stuff as misinformation or fake news. I mean, that's not the biggest problem. It's this selective, incomplete, vilifying, dehumanizing kind of content that would just drive people apart. And you saw so many people who still to this day they don't talk to the friends and family members who disagree with them in politics, and that always comes up right now around Thanksgiving. So I just thought I like to talk about news and politics. I've sort of always been interested in it, but I was a patent lawyer when I first came up with this idea for media bias chart. And I was an English major in college. So I care a lot about good arguments and rhetorical analysis. Uh, your audience may be gathering that I'm a giant nerd. So uh, I love just looking at the rhetoric and parsing it out. So I knew that another hallmark of the Facebook era was that memes just travel really fast. Infographics just seem to be the thing, like a currency that people use to communicate ideas. And I thought, a visual for showing how some news sources are better, some are okay, some are worse, even if they're not fake news, and how some are left and right, which is fine, nothing wrong with left and right. Ideologies or moral foundations, but some stuff is way, way out there, like way extreme, and you should be able to distinguish between that. So that became the media bias chart image, and it went wildly viral during that 2016 election season because people were experiencing the same things I was. So fast forward 7 years later, now there's a whole company about it.
Yeah, and we should mention you describe the two elements of the chart, and we'll describe it for the listeners here. Along an x-axis, from left to right, is partisanship, from extreme left to center to right to extreme right, and then from top to bottom, the y-axis is most reliable to least reliable. Um, I understand the reliability aspect of it. Like these are news sources where you can trust the facts. Here are some sources that claim to be news that give you a lot of bad information. Why merge that with the politics? With putting one over the other, the left to right over the top to bottom.
Yeah, it was because of the division. I mean, left-right polarization in our country really drives a lot of the division between friends and family members, and it's such a that left-right dimension, that polarization, it's so intertwined with the quality of information. So and again, I wanted to point out that left and right, liberal, conservative, moral foundations and ideologies. There's nothing inherently wrong with those ideas. It's just you can express those uh, with better facts in support
Yeah.
and worse facts. So if the
Right, you could have a conservative lean, but
sure,
be based in facts, and you could have a liberal
sure.
lean and like be much more factual, and then of course the opposite.
Sure. And even middle on our chart, we label it middle or balanced bias on purpose. We actually don't label it neutral or unbiased because, middle doesn't necessarily mean best. And
Mm.
what's left and right, it shifts quite a bit from issue to issue, from time period, geographically. So this is it's a moving target. And middle, the example I like to give about why middle doesn't necessarily mean best is if you look at middle political positions, those can be centrist political positions, which itself is a bias and not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily a correct one that will win the day or win the argument. For in 1963, before the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the left-right sides on segregation, like whether we should continue to have it in America, was one side was for it, one side was against. So what would be
Hmm.
the middle compromise position on that? There's you sort of have to fall on one side or another. But the better argument that won out in our society is that we should not have segregation. That's wrong. And so that is not even the left right dividing line anymore. That is would be a very fringe, like extreme right position to be for racial segregation.
So talk to me about what goes into the chart, how you guys put it together, because ultimately human beings are putting this together. Those human beings have their own biases. So
Yes.
how do you control for the biases of your own staff and the computers, etc.? How do you ensure that you're rating sort of agnostically from your own viewpoint?
Well, we're biased. So I think it's important to start out with the fact that we are biased because we're humans, and
Right.
everyone pointing to the chart saying you're biased is correct, and also they're biased. So
Right.
what
People tend to forget, right? Like for example, I am a man who was born in the Midwest, who
Mhm.
went to a private university in D.C., who lives in New York City.
Yeah,
There are, and I could keep going, right?
right.
In terms of the biases I have, just based on my own identity and my education, and that's true for everybody.
Your own experience as a person. Yeah, we all come with our own frame of reference and our own perspective, and there's not much you can do about that. But when it comes to certain fields where we expect some level of fairness from somebody who's trying to adjudicate something, we expect the mitigation of bias to the best of our ability. So if you think about referees or judges, like they have biases too, but we expect a certain level of conduct and some rules and some guidelines to mitigate that bias. So what we do to mitigate our own bias is we're analyzing content. The news sources and the articles and the episodes that go onto our media bias chart are all based on content analysis purely. So, what is in the sentences, what's in the headlines, what's in the images, you know, there are a number of different subfactors that I'll get into that we're rating. But in order to mitigate biases, since most news content, so much news content is inherently political, is our analysts are diverse across political ideology. And they're also diverse across personal characteristics such as age, race, and gender. But when we analyze any one article or any one episode, we always have three analysts looking at it. We have a total of 60 analysts on our staff that are trained employees of AdFontes Media, and in each shift, there'll be one left, one right, one center, looking at everything, and that just allows us to point out other people's blind spots. It works really well.
Yeah, you have a chart of your own staff and where their
Yeah.
political viewpoints are, right?
We do. Yeah. If you go to our team page, those are new. We have some graphics about our left, right, center makeup and also our diversity across those other things that we mentioned as compared to the U.S. population. It's important that we have various different people's perspectives, and the reason it's so important is because we have blind spots about what we would automatically recognize as biased or what we would inherently question. If it, you're more likely to fact check something that you don't agree with. You see a stat and you're like, that can't be true.
It doesn't reinforce my worldview.
Yeah, so you're just more likely to look it up, and when you look stuff up, you find something the statistic or the citation isn't exactly what it says, and so but then you can introduce that to somebody who the other analysts on your staff that might have just escaped
Oh.
their notice just because of their own biases. So it's critically important to have left, right, and center folks look at each piece of content.
So you guys have multiple charts, right? Multiple platforms now that you rate. You rate overall news organizations. You're rating podcasts. What else are you guys rating?
So TV and video, so everything from nightly news network TV to cable, the big ones that everybody's familiar with, and uh, YouTube. So there's also a ton of connected TV. Basically everything that's on Roku or Sling, anything that's news or what we call news-like content, because some folks look at our chart and they say, well, that's not a news content. That's not news because it's not a journalist. They're spouting a lot of opinion. But we rate that anyways because people get their information from pundits and figureheads and um, people who spouting lots of opinions about politics.
Yeah, I mean it's incredible to watch the evolution of media, even in the time that we've been watching it. That one of the places a lot of people get their information is Joe Rogan, right? Which you would have
Yeah,
said 10 years ago, like what? But now that's a legitimate place people get their information, TikTok, etc. And so I think there's a lot of that people need to kind of expand their minds holistically to say these are all information sources,
they are.
and you guys are trying to manage to rate them all. So, who is the intended audience for the AdFontes charts?
Really everyone. I mean, everyone who's a stakeholder in our media ecosystem. That's really our whole society. It's individual news consumers, it's educators, advertisers who advertise in news content, publishers themselves who want to get better, uh, social media platforms. I mean, our information ecosystem is like this because there are so many people who have a stake in the information of our society. So basically, anyone who wants to, we're a reference. We don't say take our word for it. Ideally, we would love for everybody to be able to look at a piece of content, evaluate it for themselves, and determine, how reliable is this, based on, it, on critical thinking. How left-right bias is it, and therefore, like, how should I, what kind of how many grains of salt should I take this with? So that's that's why we have an interactive media bias chart on our website for free that people can take a look at and search sources. We have an app for doing that because it really will take all of us that are stakeholders in the society to repair the issues that we all see with it.
I know you guys do you mentioned work with educators. I've had the opportunity to speak at a number of schools about smart media consumption, a whole generation of kids. Like I still grew up back in the 90s where we got the Chicago Tribune and there
Mm-hmm.
was the local news. And then like cable news started to become a thing. I remember CNN finally in the mid 90s. Kids these days have an incredible amount. I mean, an incredible amount coming at them, and Google and everything that's available on the internet. How are you focused on? I mean, I feel like there needs to be a lot of adult education, but
Right.
let's start with kids here. How are you focusing, and what's your message to educators, and how can they utilize your assets to help educate the next generation about how to look at their media sources?
The media bias chart got extremely popular among educators just when it was, before we had any, interactive tools or educational programs or anything like that, because so many educators at the middle school, high school, college level were struggling with how to, teach the fact that there's so many different news sources out there. I mean, this is uh, the curriculum for this kind of education is only starting to be has only started to be created in the last several years.
Mm-hmm.
So conveying a lot of information in a short period of time was sort of the magic of the media bias chart. Librarians really loved it too because teachers would see even in college freshman writing classes, they'd say, all right, write a paper supporting these arguments and cite your sources. And they'd see what folks would cite. And a lot of times they were extremely biased, extremely unreliable, and they realized they had to step back a few paces to start with, okay, here's how to tell between reliable and unreliable sources. This has changed in the era of the internet and social media. I mean, when the internet first came out, teachers were saying things like, don't you can't trust things that are just printed on the internet because anybody can write them, and you can't go to
Right, we had a no
Wikipedia.
Wikipedia rule for a while. I remember.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's really evolved. I mean, Wikipedia it's an excellent place to start your research on almost anything, right? I mean, it's not the place that's not the ultimate citation that you have, but Wikipedia can lead you to all the
yeah.
other citations. I mean, it's a great wealth of information and like little shortcuts. Media literacy education used to say things like, if you the website is a .org, that's trustworthy because it's a nonprofit. Like that does not apply. Like you have to be able to look at the content a bunch of different ways and look at the clues that are in there, laterally read about the same topic from other different sources in order to triangulate, where does this fit in the reliability and bias universe. So our curriculum is really designed to have students learn how to analyze the news like our analysts analyze the news. And the greatest exercise for doing that is, take 3 articles or 6 articles about the same topic, read each of them, and place them on the media bias chart yourself. So that exercise, we provide we provide activities. We provide 12 articles a week, called our topic of the week, for educators to do that exercise. And it's ideally, you want students to be able to go out in the world, no matter, and encounter content no matter where they encounter it. Look, we didn't have TikTok 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
In 3 or 4 years, there's probably going to be some other, social media platform or information source. So it's not just about like whatever new source. It's about wherever and however you come across content, how can you discern for yourself how reliable is this? How biased is this?
The reliability index from most reliable to least reliable, where do we get into danger zone? Because I mean, we could look at the chart and be like, okay, this publication, but then this publication is below it. So like, do I
Hmm.
trust that one?
Hmm.
That's less reliable according to AdFontes. So how are people to read the reliability, the kind of
Yeah.
top to bottom of your chart from,
Mhm.
because it's a spectrum.
It is. It's not as simple as news versus opinion or real news versus fake news. It's definitely not a binary. And organically, content that we've analyzed falls into about 8 buckets, and in more broadly, four reliability buckets. So on our chart, the 4 reliability buckets are color coded. They're green, yellow, orange, red, from top to bottom. And in the top green section are things that we categorize as generally, like, as highly reliable. So those are things that journalists do, like original fact reporting, investigative reporting, or just fact reporting that's dense with a lot of analysis, or even simple fact reporting like local news. Here's what happened in our neighborhood, that kind of stuff. All of that stuff reliable. It ha-
We're honored, by the way, at the Mo News podcast to be in the
yes,
green box up there. Yes.
absolutely. You bring a density of facts with some analysis along the way, and that's what constitutes, like, the density of facts, new facts being brought to the audience is a primary thing that puts things in the high reliability category. Now, below that, there's stuff that's not necessarily problematic. You can have analysis and opinion. There's a ton of content, especially cable news content, politics content, podcast content, that is analysis and opinion. So there's this middle section that it's yellow because it's just not news. It's explanations about the news, and to distinguish that is fundamental. The things that are towards the top of that spectrum are going to be more fact dense and fact supported, and the things towards the bottom are going to be less so. And and then below that, that's where you get into this orange area, where things are selective, incomplete, propagandistic. And again, this is not fake news, but this is a lot of the really damaging stuff that divides people and drives people apart. It's the stuff where people are calling each other names and insults, saying that the other side, the only reason they believe what they believe is because they're stupid or evil or both.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of content. So that's worse than just opinion, right? There are ranges of opinion, from I like broccoli to I hate people who don't look like me. Those are different gradients of opinion. So that's our orange section, and then below that we have things that are misleading and things that are inaccurate or
Mm-hmm.
fabricated. So we avoid the term misinformation and disinformation, actually, just because it's so polarized and co-opted.
As you've been putting this together and you tried to bring a science to an art of bias, if you will, and didn't it surprise you, Vanessa, when like organizations that you might have gotten their information from, and you're like, whoa, I never thought that was that left leaning or that right leaning or wasn't as reliable as I thought. Any surprises in the past couple of years?
Yes. Especially ones where people would request them and they're like, this is really popular and I like it. I think you should rate it. And I was like, all right, good suggestion. Um, I'll call out one just because, they they have beef with us anyways.
Okay.
The Young Turks, uh, really popular on the left, and it's primarily just online video and YouTube, but just my millions of followers, and so we would get requests from that all the time, and so I was sort of expecting it to be better, and it's just a lot of bias affirming, mudslinging at at the not only center left folks and center folks, but definitely against the right. So
Yeah, I imagine you take a lot incoming from media organizations who are like, "Whoa, why did you put us there? We totally think of ourselves here."
yeah, but usually they don't think of themselves as too far off from where we put them.
Got
So
it.
what's been heartening for us is that the ones that there are a lot of larger news organizations, if they fall like right under that green area, usually they're trying to put out reputable content. They think of themselves as reputable, but maybe they have a ton of opinion content that really diminishes trust with segments of their audience, or they have a lot of recent misses or faux pas that they've gotten just skewered in the media for, and that we take into account. So usually those folks are trying to get better. Folks that are out on the left and the right, they're like, well, we know we're left, we know we're right, but we don't think we're that bad. And usually the defense is, well, we don't we don't publish any lies, and everything we do, like we do the research on, and really no lies is not the bar here.
Right.
There's lots
Selective
of
truth is probably a better way to analyze these things.
yeah, most of our media landscape isn't Lady Gaga sold her soul to the Illuminati type of fake news. That's a real article, by the way. Um, it's it's usually not that overt. It's more subtle than that.
We speak at a time, there's these global surveys that Reuters does every year of it's like 40 or so countries around the world, most developed nations, and the level of trust the public has in the media. And it's probably not surprising to many consumers of this podcast to know that in America, we have the lowest level of trust in our media as compared to those 40 other countries.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know how much comparative stuff you guys have done, but is there something unique happening in America right now? Or, as you've been analyzing this space, why is it that trust is gotten so low in the US specifically? And is there something unique about American media versus media around the world?
There are a few things that are unique about American media. One is, we fortunately we have extraordinary freedom of the press guaranteed by the Constitution, and I think net that's a good thing. And not all in Europe you can there are stricter regulations even in Canada. Two,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
the media here has a lot of freedom,
Mhm.
and we're very lucky. The
Mhm.
journalists like to say that we're the only profession written into the Constitution.
Absolutely. And again, I think that's a good thing. That's a net benefit to society. And as people sort of reach for solutions to like how do we fix this, a lot of people want to reach towards government-based solutions. That's constitutionally fraught and unlikely just because of like our uh, sort of inability to coalesce and like draft major legislation around anything consequential. So I don't think we have to pursue remedies there. That's okay. The other thing is we have the largest media landscape for sure. I mean, we've looked at, with the exception of possibly India, and that's they have different factors that have gone into the like creation of various media sources there. But news sources in other larger countries like China, that's highly controlled by the government. So there aren't just like
Right.
a bunch of news sources like there or Russia. If you try to do a media bias chart in North Korea, it'd have one entry. It's really tough to do. So we uh, we have the most, and we are unusually polarized as a country because of the way there's a lot of reasons for our polarization. It's not just the media and the media's fault. There's
Right. The media takes a lot of blame here, but there's other factors.
Yeah, down to there's a great book called Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein that gets into the other non-media factors. There are some good, constitutional books. One of my advisors, Maxwell Stearns, he's a professor at the University of Maryland. He's coming out with a book about how basically our electoral college system has led to extreme levels of polarization, so that our Supreme Court and our legislative branch and our executive branch are all polarized. So you have that polarization, and then there's one more that I wanted to point to. Um, but yeah, there's just several reasons why we have this unique. Oh, the other one of the ways people have gone about gaining audiences for their polarized content is by saying, you can't trust the other guy. I'm the one that's telling you the truth. That's a whole thing. And people on the right, I mean, Fox News has done that for a long time. Like, we can't trust the mainstream media because they're not telling you the truth. We are. But then that trope has been, co-opted by folks, center and left and what have you. So it's funny when people say Americans don't trust the media, and it's a really super high number, 80%
Yeah.
plus. Americans rarely agree on, 80% of Americans rarely agree on anything. And so I think that 80% number is really it masks the fact that what people are talking about as the media in that 80% is really a bunch of different things. Folks from the left are saying, yeah, the media over there on the right, I don't trust that. Folks on the right are saying the mainstream media over there, I don't trust that. They're talking about different things. So plenty of reasons for it.
So it sounds like you're not as worried on that number than other people are. But I guess that gets me to the larger question, Vanessa. Like, what's your assessment? You've been working in this space for a while now. How worried should we be about our partisan media? And what's your goal here? What do you hope what your work is doing, how it changes for the better where we are as a country?
I love that question. I think when we start to see our work really making an impact, really making a difference, is when you can see that endless parade of polls start to say something different. Start to say, trust in the media is up. But maybe I think that's only going to happen if we distinguish what we're talking about a little bit better first. So, how in polling organizations have started to do that, separating things out into like, TikTok or other social media or, network news or what have you. But
Mm-hmm.
I think just trying to ask people if they trust the media is too broad of a question. Um, you know, do they trust like these particular major national and local news sources? When you
Mm-hmm.
start to see that going up and up and up, that's when we can really turn a corner as a country, because uh, we have to have trust in some institutions and some sort of commonality, some sort of common shared truth, and that's a thing that we're missing. So you asked, what do I want to do with this? Like, how do I want to improve the media landscape? An analogy I like to use is about junk food. I think junk news is a lot like junk food. And there are a lot of parallels to how junk food became available and proliferated in our country throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s. All of a sudden, we had all this access to highly processed, safe, clean, highly caloric processed food and fast food. And
Mm-hmm.
for a while, we're like, great, we have more food than we know what to do with. And then we started to see, like, maybe just having this unlimited access to all this food isn't the best. Like, we have to be able to distinguish the different types of food and what's in there, nutrition wise. So, yeah, we're in that similar state where we just had this glut of information. We're like, great, more information than ever before. But now we have to be able to sort through it. And so the media bias chart is sort of like telling you what the nutrition is in the content you're consuming.
Your
And
produce aisle versus the Cheetos.
right, like, I mean, at the top you've got your lean meats and your vegetables, and then right below that you got whole grains, and you definitely need those, and carbs and stuff. But then
Yeah.
you got like some donuts and fries, and they are very satisfying. But you just can't sit there and eat a lot of them. And that's what cable news is essentially.
Yes, it turns out that cable news is the equivalent of just eating donuts and junk food all the time.
Yeah, it's
It's
food and you
addictive.
won't die immediately,
Yeah.
but it's not good for you. And then below that, I mean, the stuff that's below that is sort of like cigarettes and booze. Like, you
Right.
know it's
The
bad for you.
drugs. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I love that analogy. Vanessa, thank you for trying to organize, bring some level of organization and data to the media landscape these days.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's an honor to do this work, and I have got an amazing team that does it with me every day.
Where can people learn more?
AdFontesmedia.com. That's AdFontes media.com. And yeah, explore our stuff.
All right. Thanks for joining. And we'll keep this conversation going because, as we know, this is a constantly evolving environment.
Would love to be back.
Can't wait for your AI news chart that will have to come in the coming years, right?
Oh, definitely.